What are verbs? I know sometimes we just learn language and speak them, so we don't really study them too well. But when learning a language, it's critical that you know the type of word or class that they are and what kind of things happen to them. So let's do a quick review. Verbs or words that show one, an action, for example, sing. It's an action, you're singing. Second, an occurrence. Maybe there's something that's happening. Develop. Develop, it's not doing something to someone, but it's an occurrence. It's a verb of occurrence. And some verbs express state of being. For example, exist. Here are some types of verbs that we see. Usually, in a verb, there are multiple things that are communicated or implied within a verb or word. The first one is a person. Second one, number. Third, gender. Fourth, tense. Fifth, voice. And sixth, mode. I know for English speakers, some of these concepts are going to be foreign, but with Hebrew, it's going to be really important that you know that how these six all come together in a verb. So let's go through them one by one. The first one is person. The question with this is, how is the verb referring to who is its subject? There's going to be a third person, second person, and first person. Third person is someone out there. It's either he, she, they, or them, someone that's far removed from who you are. When it's a second person reference for a verb, it's probably you are doing the action. It is you or you all who are the subject. And when we say first person as a subject of a verb, it's I or me, or we perhaps. It's the immediate surrounding that is doing action. Verbs can also communicate the number of those involved, or the subject. How many people are there? Were there more than one people, or was there only a person? So singular verbs communicate that it was a person. It's either I, you, or he or she that did an action. But if it's a verb is in the plural, the verb itself indicate that there were plural subject. They were doing it. We all were doing it. You all were doing something. With English verbs, this doesn't happen. But in Hebrew verbs, they usually indicate the gender of the subject. That is, did he do it? Was it masculine? Or did she do it? Was it feminine? Sometimes there's what we call common. For example, I. With the subject I, there's neither masculine or feminine distinction. Or we, these first common plural form, these are common. It doesn't make a gender distinction. So these are the three classes: he, she, masculine, feminine, or common. The English verbs communicate tense. That is, in other words, they indicate the time of when something happened. For example, past tense took place in the past. Future tense verbs indicates that an event will happen in the future. Present tense verbs may be an event will happen right now. A very, very difficult difference for a lot of English speakers understanding that Hebrew does not indicate tense. Instead, Hebrew is a verbal system that is known as aspectual. That is, instead of a verb communicating a time, a strict time, they actually portray an event in a certain way. And how they portray it is this question. It's either an event has happened, what we call perfective, a completed event, or the other way of saying it is imperfected or ongoing event. So let me give you a little bit more detail about this. Usually, the closest comparison we can have is the English past tense. With English past tense, they communicate events that happened in the past, right? It's already finished. Well, with Hebrew perfective tense, they're going to say something along the line of, yes, an event has finished, but an event can finish and be finished from the perspective of the speaker. So it could be present perfect. He has studied. The studying has been completed in the present. It can be past perfect. This is simple. He had studied. Or it can even be something in the future. He will have studied. You can see that this one, of course, is talking about a future event, but from the perspective of the speaker, it's something that have already completed. He will have studied at this point. The studying will be complete. Let's then talk about imperfective tense. With imperfective tense, instead of seeing an event in its entirety as completed, now you're seeing something that's ongoing as you speak. Yet to occur. Something maybe repetitive or even habitual, because if it's a habit, you might have done it once in the past, you do it probably soon, and you'll keep doing it. So these are something that's imperfective tense. The common way to communicate this in English might be the present tense, I study. The studying is ongoing. Future tense, I will study. This is the event will continue into the future. And something habitual, I study frequently. I continue to study. These are the ideas that this imperfective tense would communicate. Another thing that the verb communicates is what we call voice. And here, the question is what type of verb is being done and what's the relationship with its subject. The most simple one is active voice. In active voice, the subject is carrying out an action on something or someone else. So in the picture, you can see that the elephant, the subject elephant, is pulling a mouse. The elephant is doing an action to the mouse. But in contrast to active, there's something called the passive voice. In the passive voice, the subject is receiving or becomes the recipient of an action. So here, you can see that instead of the elephant pulling the mouse, the elephant is being pulled, receiving the pulling action by the mouse or from the mouse. So here, you can express this verbally using a passive voice. The elephant is being pulled by the mouse. The third voice is what we call the middle. In the middle, the subject is doing an action to itself or the action comes back at the subject. It's this idea of reciprocal relationship or verbal idea. So in this picture, you can see that the elephant is not doing an action to something. It's not receiving an action, but the elephant is pulling itself. So the middle voice is communicated. A middle voice communicates this idea that the elephant is doing an action that it itself receives. The sixth idea communicated in the verb is what we call a mode. What kind of action? Here we can have a simple action. I break something. The second kind or type of verb can be intensive. I'm not simply breaking something, I'm smashing it. You can tell how this is being intensified, the same action is. Another mode is what we call causal. Now, I'm kind of breaking something, but I'm not doing directly. I'm causing the breaking to happen. So here, I can cause to break something. You are being causal. You're not directly involved with it, but you're making something happen nonetheless. When studying Hebrew and memorizing these various verbs and other words, it's important to know that most Hebrew words are formed by what we call triliteral root. When I say triliteral root, just imagine a tree. And a tree that has three long roots to it. Each root is a letter. So the three letters come together to form one word. Here is an example. The word pa'al, it's formed with three letters, pe, ayin, lamed. Pa'al means to do or make. Here you can see that the triliteral root are those three letters, pe, ayin, lamed. When Hebrew changes or tries to communicate an idea, it usually adds something to or change the triliteral root in some way. Because the triliteral root is its default setting. By adding something in front of it, what we call prefixing it, or adding something to the back of it, what we call suffixing, it communicates who did it, how it was done, and makes changes to the meaning in that way. For example, if you add a yod in the front in the first example, this magically makes it to he will do. Instead, if you add the letter, a tav, at the back, as in the second example, instead of he doing it, now it becomes second person, you. Not only is it, and in the first example is he will do something, now it's you did something in the past tense. So you can see that these are how the Hebrew verbs change and conjugate in order to communicate specific nuances. Another way that it communicates or changes is by maybe not adding something particular, but even changing the vowel pointing. By changing the vowel pointing from its default setting, here we have po'el, now it gives the idea that I am doing something continuously. Hebrew has 7 what we call stems or binyanim. Yeah, going back to the tree analogy, the stem. From the center, it branches out to 7 branches. And the 7 branches can mean and connotate something different in each stem. The 7 are pa'al, sometimes called kal, as well as g, depending on the grammar textbook you use. Second, pl. Third, hifil. Fourth, hitpa'el. Fifth, nifal. Sixth, pual. And seventh, hofal. It's really important, and we're going to learn each of these 7 stems throughout our Hebrew course. There are some very minor stems other than this, but they're so rare that we won't be covering this in our course. What's crucially important for us to know is that when we learn Hebrew, we focus on the pa'al or kal stem. This is because here's a statistic of how frequently a verb appears in various stems in the entire Old Testament. You will see that almost 70% of all verbs appearing in the Old Testament is in the pa'al or kal stem. So if you know the kal stem, which is the most simple basic stem, the simple action stem, you're going to be able to use this as a basis to learn the other forms and how they differ. The other major stems are going to be pl and hifil, nifal, 9%, 13%, and close to 6%. And you're going to find out that the other 3 stems, hitpa'el, pu'al, and hofal, are relatively rare, but still it appears frequently enough that you should learn these. I want to conclude by talking about how each of these stems communicate different ideas of the verb. Remember, instead of using different words, what Hebrew would do is they'll use one word but change it slightly, adding something in front or back, or maybe changing the vowel pattern to give it a different nuance. We have the most basic, simple, active voice, which is the kal or pa'al, the most common form. And let's say we want to make a verb like I do, passive. I was done something. You make it into the nifal stem. You also, let's say I did something, we're going to change this into something maybe habitual or intense. This is going to be in the pl. Like, let's say I did it over and over again. We're going to change the kal verb into a pl form. Now let's say we're going to make it's intensive, but I still were receiving the action. So I was being served, or action was being done on me over and over again. Then it will become a pool. This is an intensive passive voice. If it's an intensive reflexive voice, let's say I'm really doing something over and over again to myself. Let's say I was practicing over and over, Hebrew over and over, and doing this to myself, you'll make the certain verb do to a hitpa'el form. Finally, let's say I don't feel like studying, but I really should make someone else study, right? Or learn something. So I'm going to cause someone to do something. Here, we're going to make a certain verb in what we may call a hifil stem. So this, and the hofal is the passive, meaning receiving something that's causative. So here is how each verb stems are related. We're going to go into each verbal stems and learn each one of them throughout the semester.